Ladies, gentlemen, brethren and companions, let me first extend a very warm welcome to you all to this, the 4th edition of Enlightenment Live. My name's Steve Ricks and I'm a member of Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment, Chapter of Enlightenment and a member of the Enlightenment Live production team. Enlightenment Live began life as the online presence of the Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment as a way for us to reach out to members and friends of the Masonic province of Berkshire during the first lockdown when we were prevented from meeting in person. Hopefully we're moving towards happier times, but we will continue to produce and offer this online magazine with the intention of stimulating and we hope satisfying curiosity about why as Masons we do the things that we do and what makes Freemasonry so compelling an interest for us. We've also recently witnessed the consecration of the Berkshire Chapter of Enlightenment, which shares the overarching goals of the Enlightenment project in the province. So the project now comprises the Lodge, the Chapter and Enlightenment Live. The three elements complement each other and provide a tangible reminder of the indissoluble link between the craft and the Holy Royal Arch. In each edition we develop a central theme, which is connected to events in the wider world or to the time of the year. For example, in July we had an Olympic theme and we explored the crucial part that Lord Desborough, who was a Berkshire Freemason, played in organising the London Games. In September our theme was Beginnings, and we looked at the start of Freemasonry in the province through a brief history of the earliest lodges in each centre. In this edition our central theme is one of the 4 cardinal virtues, fortitude, or in more familiar language, courage and persistence in the face of peril, difficulties. Every new Mason is encouraged to develop fortitude and the other cardinal virtues in the address delivered at every initiation. At this time of the year, when we remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice in defence of our liberties, it seems appropriate to shine a light on those Berkshire Masons who gave great and exemplary service to our country in time of war. So in our first article in this edition, Dave Wyatt will be looking at the Berkshire Freemasons who were recipients of the Victoria Cross, the country's highest award for gallantry in the presence of the enemy. We'll see that although those recipients exhibited extremes of courage and selflessness in conflict, we can all be inspired by their example in our own lives. Our second article continues the series of conversations between a younger and an older brother, a newer member and an elder of long-standing membership and wisdom. In this conversation, Dean Reed will ask John Avery to explain the significance of the inner guard's sharp instrument, the poignard. John talks about its symbolism and that of the roles of the Tyler and inner guard. Just what are they guarding against? Following John and Dean, Ian Freeth will take a closer look at some of the 50 firing glasses in our own museum collection. Ian has taken some beautiful photographs of the most interesting and exquisite glasses, and he'll explain something about their history and use. Next, we welcome a piece by Ian Hopgood, the most excellent Grand Superintendent of the Holy Royal Arch Order in Berkshire. He will celebrate the consecration of the Chapter of Enlightenment. He explains the ceremony and points out that it's a rare event in the province. The previous consecration was that of the Wilder Chapter in 1994, 27 years ago. He also explains how the chapter fits in the Enlightenment family and shares the objectives of the Lodge and Enlightenment Live with particular focus on learning more about the order. He's also able to point out a very special symmetry that currently exists in the Lodge and the chapter. And finally we'll look at this edition's Conundrum, which offers a prize worth £25 to the winner. So without more ado, let's move on to our first article, presented by Dave Wyatt.
Hello brethren. Over the next 10 minutes I'm hoping to demonstrate the link between the Victoria Cross and one of the cardinal virtues, fortitude. The Victoria Cross was created after the Crimea War by Queen Victoria and introduced on the 29th of January 1856. Since then there have been 1,358 Victoria Crosses awarded to 1,355 individuals. Therefore, 3 people have been awarded it twice. Prior to the Crimea War, we didn't have a method of recognition for this type of act, hence the Victoria Cross creation. The Victoria Cross is awarded for most conspicuous bravery or some daring and preeminent act of valour or self-sacrifice or extreme devotion to duty in the presence of the enemy. Originally, they were only given to living recipients. This was changed in 1907, and the previous 9 men that had died but would have been awarded the Victoria Cross if they had survived were sent to their next of kin. While I was researching this, I discovered that Berkshire, as a province, has had 3 members that gained the Victoria Cross. 1 in the Crimea War and 2 in the First World War. We will look at these brothers in a bit more detail shortly. There are a few more facts that I would like to share with you before we do this. That there's some half a dozen brethren that attained the Distinguished Service Order, the second highest honour the country awards soldiers for outstanding acts of courage or leadership. Berkshire as a province lost 27 brothers during the First World War. An amazing fact that in the First World War, of all the Victoria Crosses awarded, 10% were to Freemasons. Let's just reflect on that for a second. 1 in 10 men awarded the Victoria Cross were Masons. So let's take a closer look at Berkshire's 3 recipients. Some of you will be familiar with Private Frederick Potts, later to be a Lance Corporal. The Victoria Cross was awarded for saving a fellow soldier in August 1915 in Gallipoli. He did this by carrying him on all things a shovel. From then onwards, he was known as the hero with a shovel. A couple of points: he was personally wounded in the leg himself. The wound was so severe, he didn't make a full recovery until after the war, some 3 years later. And the soldier he saved, Andrew, went on to live till he was 89. He was initiated into Aldermaston Lodge in September 1924 and raised in May 1925. He went on to be Master some years later, and he sadly died in November 1945. The next recipient, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver Watts. The citation for his Victoria Cross was for covering the retreat of his men from the line, and had he not been for his actions, all his men would have perished. The pivotal piece for his citation reads as follows: for most conspicuous bravery or self-sacrifice, devotion to duty, and exceptional gallant leading during a critical period of operations. Sadly, his body was never recovered. He was initiated into Loddon Lodge 3427 in January 1911. The lodge having been consecrated in May the year before, and I'm going to take a leap of faith here and say that he was one of the very first initiates. He was raised in April 1911, and he died in 1918, aged 41, at Rosignol Wood, France. The next brother, Brigadier General 1st Baron Lord Wantage Robert James Lloyd Lindsay, Victoria Cross, Knight Commander of the Most Honourable Order of the Bath, Member of Parliament, Fellow of the Royal Society. He also has 2 other international awards, one from the Foreign Legion of Honour and one from the Turkish Order. The citation for his Victoria Cross was when the line at the Battle of Alma in the Crimea War was about to collapse. He stood firm with the colours, held the line and even charged the Russians, driving them back. This was on the 20th of September 1854. As I have already said, the Victoria Cross wasn't created until 1856, after the Crimea War. What I've also found out is on the same day, in the same battle, 6 other men received the Victoria Cross, and one of those was the first to receive the Victoria Cross. So I can only surmise that of all the recipients, he must have been one of the first few. He was initiated in March 1854 and then raised in April 1854 in Malta Lodge 407, but soon became a joining member of Windsor Castle 771 in 1860. He joined Abbey Lodge in 945 in 1863. After being a Mason for some time, he became Provincial Grand Master for Berkshire in 1898 until his death in June 1901. A couple of facts I found out during the investigation was he was the instigator for the formation of the Red Cross. He was a personal friend of Florence Nightingale. He was also an MP, which I've already said. He's had a lodge named after him, and his surname is the joining of his and his wife's, Lloyd. So, all in all, I think a busy man. That brings us on to Fortitude. If we now dive into our ritual, you will be familiar with the first degree ritual. There are a number of clues. We are told about the 4 cardinal virtues, namely temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. The distinguished character of a good Freemason are virtue, honour, and mercy, and may they ever be found in a Freemason's breast. These can be seen in our lodge on the first degree tracing board in the 4 corners as tassels. Focusing on the second, fortitude, this is what we have found. The dictionary defines it as strength of mind that enable a person to encounter danger or bear pain or adversity with courage. I think that says it all, really. Some of you will be familiar with the Masonic lectures in the little green book that is a companion to the little blue book of emulation. The lectures, for those that you're not familiar with them, is a series of questions and answers, not too dissimilar to the questions and answers for the 2nd and 3rd degree. If you go to the first lecture, 6th section, the question is simply fortitude. The answer or response would be, it is that noble and steady purport of the soul, which is equal distance from rashness and cowardice. It enables us to undergo any pain, labour, danger or difficulty when thought necessary or deemed prudently expedient. This virtue, like temperance, ought to be deeply impressed on the breast of every Mason. I just want to focus on 2 elements. When thought necessary and deemed prudently expedient. If you now go back to why the award of a Victoria Cross, I think that you can see the similarities there. As I've already mentioned, that during the First World War, Berkshire province lost 27 brothers. I just want to reflect on this and put their lodges and names up so we can remember them. I have no words, I just want to reflect and pay my respects.
Thank you, Dave. A fascinating look at three truly heroic Masons and a reminder of the sacrifices made by so many over the years. 3 VCs of our own and 10% of all VCs awarded in the First World War were Masons. Each of them exhibited extraordinary fortitude. Now let's move on to the conversation in which Dean Reed asks John Avery about the significance of the poignard. Not a weapon of war perhaps, but a weapon nevertheless. So, why is the Inner Guard so armed?
Good evening, John. Like everyone else, when I was initiated, I found myself at the door of the lodge, properly prepared, and had the point of a sharp implement presented to my uncovered left breast. I was then asked if I could feel anything. Of course, I answered that I could. Later in the ceremony, it was explained to me that what I'd felt was the point of a poignard held by the Inner Guard who'd have killed me if I'd suddenly rushed forward. Please, can you explain the symbolism of this, as I assume you would not have actually killed me?
Good evening, Dean. Once again, another great question, which I'll try to answer both historically and symbolically. Historically, the presentation of a sharp instrument to the breast of the candidate on entry to the lodge is another connection that Freemasonry has with operative Masonry, being part of the ancient practice of testing the senses of a potential apprentice before accepting him for training as a stonemason. We know he can hear what's said to him because he replies. We know he could see, or he wouldn't require to be hoodwinked. We know he can use his limbs to move about, and now we know he can feel. Incidentally, the instrument originally used by operative stonemasons for this test was not the poignard like this, as in lodges today, but a trowel with a sharp point, like this. And in fact, there are still some lodges today where a trowel is still used, especially those Athol lodges, which originally owed allegiance to the Grand Lodge of the Ancients, before the establishment of the present United Grand Lodge in 1813. Also, in such lodges, you may find the jewel on the collar of the Inner Guard is not 2 crossed swords, but a trowel, such as this.
Yes, that's very interesting from a historical perspective. But what should I understand symbolically as a speculative Freemason and not a working operative stonemason?
Good point, Dean. For a speculative Mason, it's also a timely reminder that he's about to engage in something serious. It also gives meaning to the part of the charge after initiation, where monarchs are said to exchange the scepter for the trowel. As in olden days, the newly initiated brother was given a trowel attached to a collar to wear at the festive board. Also, it should be remembered that no Inner Guard would actually kill a candidate by stabbing him with the poignard if he attempted to rush forward, and there's no record of such an event ever having taken place. The episode is obviously symbolic, the Inner Guard representing the moral guard we place within ourselves to challenge all unworthy thoughts and impulses which might intrude upon our inner self from our baser outer nature while we're engaged in the search for inner truth. Our lodge door being symbolic of our personal senses, which require protection to prevent unwanted thoughts entering and damaging ourself. This protection is symbolically provided by 2 gatekeepers in the persons of the Tyler and the Inner Guard. The Tyler, being placed outside the door facing outwards and armed with a sword, fends off all unwanted intrusion from the outer world, while the Inner Guard, facing inwards, protects ourselves from unwanted thoughts generated within our own psyche. The poignard he carries being emblematic of the mental pain we would have to endure every time an unworthy thought surfaces within our consciousness, symbolized by the jab we receive on entering the lodge for the first time, and reinforced by the prick of the compass point while taking our obligation. However, we also need to consider another item that's closely associated with the poignard when first entering the temple on our initiation. A cable tow, such as this length of rope with a running noose, which is placed about our neck and is supposed to make it impossible to retreat, without also being fatal. We're therefore faced with two consequences. If we rush forward, we'll impale ourselves on the point of the poignard, and if we try to run away, we'll be prevented by the cable tow about our neck, both actions being equally fatal.
Yes, I get that from the explanation from the worshipful master just after I took my obligation, but I still don't understand why.
Okay, again, remember that the actions taking place in this part of the ceremony of initiation come originally from the operative stonemasons. So, as free and accepted or speculative Freemasons, we must look at the allegory and symbolism of these actions. As I've already said, no inner guard has ever killed a candidate because he tried to rush forward. No Tyler has restrained him by tugging on the cable tow about his neck. The symbolism is, however, tangible and real, and is best explained like this. We enter the lodge to gain knowledge of ourself, symbolized by light. But we should not expect to gain instant knowledge of anything by rushing headlong into it, even if, for today's young men, this has become true due to the existence of the internet, with instant access to knowledge and information via mobile technology. But knowledge of some things can't be gained instantly, but only by approaching the task slowly and steadily, or prudently, and not giving up or retreating when things get difficult. In other words, advancing with fortitude, one step at a time.
That's all very well, but I've a very busy life with family and work commitments, and just trying to learn the ritual is taking all of my time, without also trying to understand the history and symbolism. But what I'm learning that is unless I increase my knowledge and understanding of the underlying symbolism, I'll miss a lot of the pleasure connected with my Masonic journey. Understanding why I was pricked with the point of a poignard now makes more sense. Thank you, John.
I'm glad you found it useful, Dean. But please remember, there are several layers of understanding associated with every Masonic symbol. This has been just one. So please continue to speculate and delve into others, and so build an individual understanding that will give you personal satisfaction. To assist with such a journey of understanding, the next issue of Enlightenment Live will contain another talk with an elder brother, with the topic of discussion being the letter G, addressing where it came from and what we should understand its meaning to be. Goodbye.
Thanks to Dean and John for another thought-provoking piece. Some of the familiar objects that we use in the lodge simply disappear into the background, perhaps because we're concentrating so hard on the performance of the ritual and what we do, rather than asking why we do it. Anyway, thanks again for shedding some light on the poignard. We now move on to another class of Masonic objects, but this time it's one that we sometimes see as our festive boards, the firing glass. Ian Freeth has created an illustrated article based on some of the 50 plus firing glasses in our own collection in the museum at Sindlesham. When you visit the museum, which is highly recommended by the way, you'll find a display of some of the most notable examples. Do we think there's a military connection? Let's see Ian's piece.
I welcome you to this feature on the history behind firing glasses and hope to speculate why they've become part of what we do. I will talk about various articles that review and consider how firing glasses are used, as well as some of the thoughts of why they become part of the toasting process at the festive board. As I outline and speculate on some of these ideas, I will also intersperse video clips and images of some of the firing glasses that are within the museum at Sindlesham. This, with the research I've undertaken, I hope will give you a window into a small part of the items and literature that is held in both our library and museum. An article by Brother Yoshio Washizu from 1998 that many authors refer to considers a variety of influences for the use of firing glasses. I will look to review elements of his ideas as well as other sources that I found. At the start of Brother Yoshio's article, he considers the connections of gunfire salutes that would have occurred at times of celebration. One specific event he highlights refers to a note in the 17th century formed from a brief description given in the town of Preston. The quote is, "The mayor with his great attendance is received in the streets by his guards of soldiers and companies of trade. He makes his procession to the church gate bands, where he and his attendants are entertained with a speech made by one of the chief scholars of the school. A barrel or hogshead of nappy ale standing close by the bars is broached, and a glass offered to the mayor, who begins a good prosperous health to the king, afterwards to the queen, the nobility and gentry having pledged the same. At each health begun by Mr. Mayor, it is attended with a volley of shot from the musketeers attending. The country people there present drinking of the remainder." With this article, Brother Yoshio then goes on to consider other examples where gunshot or volleys are used to punctuate similar celebratory events. From my research at our own Masonic library in Sindlesham, aided by Roger Coles, we found a number of articles. One of these was from a letter to the editor of a monthly Masonic journal. The contributor had explained that they'd been casually discussing the concept of firing glasses with another brother. The basis was that a firing glass had two purposes. One was for their daily grog ration, and the other to measure the powder for the naval guns. As is then pointed out by the editor, with some scorn and a reaction of disbelief, he states that at this point in history, the guns would need multiple scoops of powder with the glass, which would make the need for rapid firing ineffective. But also, the thought was that in the 1700s, the guns were fired with pre-measured cylindrical cartridges. This now brings me on to another point that is again raised in the article by Brother Yoshio, but is also within the monthly journal, the Masonic Record. This article first reiterates the principle of drinking to the health within a toast and indicates that it was likely that our operative brethren were a social body of men and would take any opportunity to socialise. Seems quite normal for a festive board, I think. Also, the article makes reference to the point that we can read from the historic meeting of members of the 4 old lodges in London, and I will paraphrase from the article. In 1717, they constituted themselves a Grand Lodge and resolved to hold the annual assemble and feast. Also, 4 years later, on Lady Day 1721, Grand Master Payne proposed for a successor our most noble brother John, Duke of Montague, who, being present, was forthwith saluted Grand Master-elect, and his health drank in due form. And it's interesting to see that phrase of due form, because that could have meant toasting in various different ways, but it gives a note of formality. Taken from this, it appears that the principles of toast to others is an unquestionable ceremonial characteristic, and no doubt an expression of the benevolence that is a fundamental element of Freemasonry. However, where does the concept of firing glasses come from? That is the question I want to consider from those aspects of the research that was undertaken in the Berkshire Masonic Library. From reproduction of the Master Key to Freemasonry, issued in 1925 by the Lodge of Research, an account was given of the ceremonial of toasting and firing, said to have been practised from about the mid-18th century. In addition to this, there can be found earlier references of texts printed on the continent. These continental articles point to the principle that attention was paid to the etiquette and ceremony of the social board. There was a ritual for opening and conducting a table lodge, as it was called. A few details of this ceremony may be quoted from a French ritual document published in the year 1744. This was entitled New Catechism of the Freemasons. From this work we can gather that most of the lodges abroad were held in taverns or inns, even if they met elsewhere for their Masonic work. The dinner or banquet was served in a cabaret, where the host and the waiters were also members of the order. In France, this was considered a protection from visits by the police, who from early times had always been suspicious of any body of men meeting behind locked doors. There is in the library of the Grand Orient of France a copy which had been printed in Amsterdam in 1762, but which is said to have been in use in Berlin from as early as 1730. The ritual describes that once the meal reached dessert, all the brethren rose and the master said, "Brethren, we are about to open a table lodge for the drinking of customary healths with all honours of masonry and with 3 times 3. At the same time, they were cautioned that they were subject to the same regulations, obligations and penalties as when the lodge was open in regular form for work." Once the table lodge had been opened, new names were given to everything on the table. The lighted candles were called stars, food was designated materials, wine was called red powder or strong powder, bottles were barrels, and glasses cannon. Charging the cannon was pouring the wine into the glasses. In reviewing this, we can see similarities in today's modern festive board, as the Director of Ceremonies, or Tiler, looks to close the doors after waiting for the table to be cleared before the toasts. This is as if a table lodge is being opened. In some lodges, before the toasts are called, the master inquires to the wardens to report if they are fully charged in the west and fully charged in the south. Researching this has shown similarities to what we do and also why we may do it. However, it's possibly brought more questions than answers. Some of those questions that come to my mind are: is it an extension of regularity to the formality and respect that the toasts deserve as to whom they are made, and therefore requires the formality of a subordinate lodge being tiled? If this has the extension of the formality of French dining, why was it adopted? Was it just the fashion of the time, or would this have something of the influence of the Huguenot migrants, especially as they were known supporters of the Hanoverian royalty? Some of that obviously has connections to the first Grand Lodge and one of its founding lodges. In looking to mimic the firing of salutes, and that the glasses are cannon and the wine powder, are the glasses being seen as another form of object in a lodge? If so, is this why, as we've seen from some of the glasses illustrated in this talk, they are heavily decorated with Masonic symbols? Some of those relate to the craft, but to some also seem to relate to the Royal Arch. Depending on the design of those symbols, which constitutions do they refer to? English, Scottish, or Irish? So to conclude, we may be more aware of what could have influenced the use of firing glasses and the principles of firing at the festive board. We may even have some sense of why we do it. But from the questions I've just raised, some of the details of why may still need to be considered. I can only suggest you visit the library and museum yourselves when you're next in Sindlesham or at any other time and pursue your own research.
Thanks, Ian. Fascinating to see that firing toasts was once a common practice in Georgian England and was adopted by Freemasons at the time. Clearly it's become unusual in the wider world today and is now more or less confined to Masons. It's one of those things that illustrates the special nature of our membership, of belonging to and belonging in our lodge. Our next article focuses on the Holy Royal Arch and on the arrival of a new chapter and a new part of the Enlightenment project in the province, the Berkshire Chapter of Enlightenment. To introduce this newcomer and tell us more about the consecration, it's over to excellent companion Ian Hopgood, the most excellent Grand Superintendent in and over the province of Berkshire.
Brethren and companions, welcome to this inaugural session of Royal Arch Matters at Enlightenment Live. I'm delighted to include enlightenment about the Royal Arch on this wonderful platform to support the educational aspirations of the companions of this province. And what better way to start than to take a brief look into the recently consecrated Berkshire Chapter of Enlightenment. At our annual convocation of Provincial Grand Chapter in 2018, I shared my vision with you for Berkshire to have an educational chapter to follow in the successful footsteps of the Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment. And in November 2019, a petition with 20 founders was submitted to Supreme Grand Chapter. Almost 2 years later, we assembled on the 1st of October, ready, prepared, and excited to realise that vision and consecrate that new chapter. Chapter consecrations in Berkshire are a very rare event, with only 35 new consecrations in its 130-year history. The 3 original chapters which constituted the province in 1891, Windsor Castle, Union and Abbey chapters, were of course already in existence. This ceremony was last performed in Berkshire 27 years ago, when the Wilder chapter was consecrated by my predecessor, excellent companion Leslie Longbotham, in March 1994, giving Berkshire 38 chapters. As head of the order, it is an enormously proud moment for a Grand Superintendent to consecrate a new chapter, and will always be a pinnacle point during their term of office. The Berkshire Chapter of Enlightenment was consecrated to bring to life the objectives and aims of this province, to support our companions' enjoyment of Royal Arch Masonry from an educational perspective. Consecration is described as an ancient act to set aside a place and dedicate it to a sacred or holy purpose. The consecration ceremony of a new chapter is similar in every respect to the consecration of a craft lodge, only more colourful and spectacular than you might think, due to the regalia worn and the ornate furniture of the sacred vault. The chapter is opened by the consecrating team, which consists of the most excellent Grand Superintendent, with his second and third Provincial Grand Principals, Provincial Grand Scribes Ezra and Nehemiah, and a Provincial Grand Director of Ceremonies. As is common practice for Freemasons, a prayer is offered to invoke the blessing of our Lord, and this is delivered by the consecrating Joshua, whose role in Royal Arch includes the priestly function. Of course, no consecration can take place unless it is authorised by the Supreme Grand Chapter of England, and this comes by way of a Charter of Constitution from the First Grand Principal, which must be read in full at the start of the ceremony, and, before the founders standing in the west. The names of the 3 founding principles, which are stated in the Charter, are acknowledged and confirmed by the petitioners. Following an oration by consecrating Joshua, an anthem, and additional prayers, the consecrating officer delivers the invocation. This is a plea to the true and living God Most High for mercy and for him to listen to the prayers and requests of the founders. Next, a portion of scripture from the book of Ezra is read by scribe Nehemiah, reminding us of the first foundation stones laid at the construction of the Second Temple by the children of Israel following their liberation from captivity in Babylon. Scribe Nehemiah held a high position of honor in the court of the Persian king and was appointed by the king as governor of Judah. He was a man of wisdom who was discreet and consistently honest and trustworthy to his king. Thus, robed in a white surplice denoting his teaching role, he is selected to read the scriptures and psalms. The consecrating officer orders the candles to be lighted, and the consecration ceremony then commences according to ancient custom, with a symbolic use of the ancient fruits of the earth, corn, wine, oil, and salt. The sacred vault with its altar and ornaments are considered the heart of the chapter, and therefore become the focal point of the ceremony of consecration and the blessing of God. Corn is scattered on the sacred vault. This is a symbol of plenty and abundance, and represents our prayers for prosperity to be bestowed on the chapter. Next, wine is poured. This is a symbol of joy and cheerfulness, and calls for the hearts of the members to be filled with gladness and rejoicing. Lastly, oil is poured. This is a symbol of peace and unanimity, and signifies everlasting peace and harmony amongst its members. Finally, salt is sprinkled on both the vault and on the left shoulder of each of the founders. This is a symbol of friendship and fidelity, and its meaning is to preserve prosperity, happiness, and peace on the chapter and its members until time shall be no more. Thus consecrated, the chapter is then dedicated to the Most High and his service, as well as to the 3 original grand principles. The ceremony of censing, which follows, is conducted by the consecrating Joshua and represents sanctification and purification of the chapter, the consecrating officers, and the founding principles and members of the chapter. The burning of incense is interpreted by the Christian faith as a symbol of the prayers of the faithful rising to the heavens to be heard by our Lord. The concluding part of the ceremony sees the new chapter formally constituted and formed by declaration from the consecrating officer in the name of Supreme Grand Chapter of England and by command of the First Grand Principal. The principal aim for the consecration of Berkshire Chapter of Enlightenment is a continuation of the vision of the Berkshire Learning and Development Committee. It is the recognition of how Berkshire Provincial Grand Chapter can actively support companions from an educational perspective and help each companion reflect on our beliefs, values, history, and the symbolism and meaning embedded in our ritual and ceremonies. Meeting twice a year at Sindlesham, the chapter will not work exaltations, but it has the potential to provide demonstrations as well as providing presentations of specific aspects of the Holy Royal Arch, including questions and discussions, which will often continue at the festive board. The purpose of the chapter is to encourage and support companions who want to learn more about why we do things that we do, our history, the symbolism in our rituals, our guiding principles and values, with the emphasis being on why rather than how. The Enlightenment family, comprising of both a lodge and a chapter, now encapsulates the true nature of pure ancient Freemasonry and reinforces the indissoluble link between craft and Royal Arch Masonry from an educational perspective. Berkshire is further united by a unique combination of the head of the Royal Arch, the Grand Superintendent, as Worshipful Master of the Lodge, and the head of the craft, the Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master, as Most Excellent Zerubbabel of the chapter. Enlightenment Live has proved a successful platform for delivering short magazine-type articles to help stimulate education and learning for Berkshire Freemasons. Whilst previous editions have focused solely on craft masonry, future editions will include a Royal Arch slot to support companions across the province and hopefully attract Master Masons who have not yet completed the final chapter of their pure ancient Freemasonry. Brethren and companions, I hope this brief article has stimulated your interest and enthusiasm for knowledge and learning of the Royal Arch. For those Master Masons wishing to complete their pure ancient Freemasonry and experience the beautiful and colourful exaltation ceremony, there is a small brochure introducing the Royal Arch degree, which we would be pleased to send you. Please submit your details to the Provincial Grand Scribe Ezra. Thank you, brethren and companions.
Thank you, Ian. Hope you can see the Enlightenment family has now been completed by the creation of the chapter. The Lodge, the chapter and Enlightenment Live will be moving forward with a coordinated programme of complementary events and themes during the coming year, illustrating the indissoluble link between the craft and the Royal Arch and encouraging curiosity about the values and principles of the orders. Expect Enlightenment Live to carry articles on both in future editions. Our next item is the Conundrum. This time our question has been devised by Worshipful Brother John Avery, and he assures me that the answer is available to everyone with a little research, regardless of your Masonic standing. In other words, from the newest entered apprentice to the most experienced Grand Officer. The physical cable tow that we wear as a candidate at our initiation is only a few feet long, but traditionally this item also had a symbolic length associated with our membership of the craft. How long is this? Send your answer by email to s9946@barkspgl.org.uk with Conundrum 4 in the subject line. The first correct answer drawn from the digital hat on the 1st of February 2022 will receive a Masonic prize of value up to £25. Good luck, everyone. Finally, it's time to close Enlightenment Live until our next edition, which will be published on the 16th of February 2022. If you have any questions or feedback for us, please send an email to s9946@barkspgl.org.uk with edition 4 in the subject line and we'll get back to you. On behalf of the presenters, myself and the rest of the production team behind the planning, development and delivery of this edition, thank you for your interest. We all hope that you found something that's whetted your curiosity. We also thank the volunteers of the museum and library, particularly Roger Coles and Ron Stone. Thank you and goodbye until the next edition.